Let us speak upon the gods and self-deification. So I've gotten this question quite often, probably dozens of times at least since I started my YouTube channel about 11 years ago, regarding self-deification. Can we become a god here now while we are alive? Is it a process that is desirable? Is it something that both can be done and while maintaining our original self? And this is where the details are paramount, I would say. When you're seeking to become a god, you have to ask why. Why do you want to become a god? Is it because you feel like you can have control over other souls, other beings, have a kingdom, have a world, make your own kingdom, make your own reality? Is that it? What if you want to become a god of your own reality, you simply have to become a god of your own mind, of your own inner reality. So usually the question becomes, do you want to live forever? Do you want immortality as you are, as the person you are now? Do you want immortality? Or do you want to rule over other souls? What is it that you want from becoming a god? A whole lot of what usually people want is to have all these different powers. Great speed, creationary ability, intellect, and mind stuff expanded vastly. To be able to have a level of freedom that you did not have as a human being, to control things. Our world is so connected to everyone else's world that usually when people talk about becoming a god, self-deification, they're talking about controlling more of the world that they share with other beings. And their world connected to everyone else's world. Because if you wanted to become a god and you didn't want control over other beings or other, a community, town, city, continent, a world, worlds, if that wasn't included, then you can do that right now as a human being. Not having control over other human beings and your environment and reality. If you didn't want that, then just controlling yourself would be fine, would be easy, and would be desirable. And immortality. When we're talking about self-deification, we're talking about the extension of this singular ego. The person that you are right now, you want it to be forever, or you want it to be for a very, very long time. Because if it wasn't for a very long time, then you'd just be mortal. And if you just had some control, then you'd be mortal. And if you had a lot of control and it extended for a long time, you'd be a god. You have to ask yourself why you want to be what you want to be. Why do you want to be God? Why do you want to become such a being? And could you not achieve a lot of these things by just working hard to be a really good human? Or even a very powerful human, or a human that has all of these abilities to shape community, shape space, shape the technology, with the technology around you. And say you had a bunch of money, say you were wealthy, it's almost like you become a little god to be wealthy for your limited time, but you become a limited god. And in every story of the gods, there's always not only an option, not only a chance, but by definition, a time when your time as God, when your reign would end, like a very powerful king. Let us look at other god stories to help us understand this. So, Demeter, Greek pantheon. Demeter, goddess of fertility, the harvest, of nature, of the life of the land, and kind of the life of hunger, the control of hunger and the control of the life forces that are related to the earth, which ultimately everything is. Demeter is very powerful. So when Hades took Demeter to Hades, very convenient, it's a double Hades. When Hades took Persephone to Hades, kidnapped her to be his wife, Demeter, she went throughout, before she knew where Persephone was, she went throughout the world. And she disguised herself as kind of a nurse, a maid, a wet nurse. Somebody a woman who could take care of children. And, that was what she was going to pose as while she traveled from kingdom to kingdom, village to village, city to city. She was going to pose as this caregiver so that she can continue to gather information and look for her daughter Persephone. While she was a nurse, a caregiver to children, to small children, she became a caregiver to, I think it was a king's children. And she had some very odd ways of behaving towards these children. She was really good at her job, but she had this habit of two things. One, when the baby would cry, she would drop it. This, I think the interpretation is, though it's not plainly stated, is that, there's something wrong. Oh, you need to, I shouldn't be holding you, I should just drop you. And you should, be able to, you're not in my care anymore, you're not in my hands anymore, and you can walk around and you're no longer confined by me. So she always thought that the baby was being confined by her, that she was holding the baby back. She would drop it when it was crying. Like, okay, I've placed too many bounds on you. Oh, I'm so sorry for holding you. That kind of thing. And another thing that she did that was interesting. So one of the more positive things was she would feed the baby ambrosia, these apples of immortality, make the baby big and strong and be able to do all these feats. The ambrosia apples are usually kind of compared to immortality. If you eat these apples and you become immortal, and these are very healthy for immortals, so she was feeding the babies. And there's another key aspect to being immortal, to being a god, because she kind of knew that babies were immortal, but her human babies, but her motherly instinct as a goddess was to be a goddess mother rather than a mother of humans. So this is why she behaved strangely like this. And another thing that she would do is that, when it was time to sleep, when it was nighttime, she, placed babies in the fire. Now, these babies never got killed from being dropped or being placed in the fire, but that was her motherly instinct. Okay, as a goddess mother, Demeter, she would place the baby in the fire because half of being immortal is not only eating the apples of ambrosia, big and strong, become quite remarkable babies. The other half was to play, when immortals sleep, when gods sleep, when goddesses sleep, or even demigods and demigoddesses, place them in the fire at night to where they sleep to burn off all the mortality. Because mortality was kind of a thing that in sleep, to rest in sleep, usually we kind of go back to our original self, where we're a part of the grander whole of God souls, or even all souls in general. Just kind of go back to that naturally when we sleep. In multiple cultures, when you sleep, it's said that the soul goes back to gods, Brahman, immortality, whatever you want to call it, goes back to rest. When our body sleeps, our soul goes back to rest before coming back here into this mortal cage that we find ourselves in. But for gods and goddesses to sleep, perhaps most gods and goddesses don't sleep very often, but when they sleep, sleep in fire to burn off the mortality, to burn off that which confines. Not to kill themselves, but to burn off that which confines, that which limits. This story kind of teaches us a couple things. So the ambrosia apples, there are things that the gods do, the gods consume that make them gods and goddesses. Crying when there's something wrong, a god is dropped. Because obviously whoever's holding them is doing something wrong, because a god or a goddess can do it all on their own. And if you just leave them alone, they'll figure it out, even if they're a baby. and the placing in the fire to burn off the mortality, that very much has to do with the limited nature of our mortality, where, the body of that day or a lifetime, for that soul to be free of this one person, this one ego that we are, you have to burn it off, because gods and goddesses are not the same kinds of body conscious and ego conscious, identity conscious that human beings are. It's almost like, every time a baby god has to sleep, placed in the fire, and it remains a god or a goddess. It remains immortal, but the individual thing that it was for that day is burned off. And a lot of the time when people want to self-deify themselves, they're not thinking of self-deifying their soul, they're talking about self-deifying their ego. Because your soul can't be destroyed. Your soul's going to be fine, but you want to remember. You want to be the same person. You want to be the same thing and continue being that same thing. It's not how it works for gods and goddesses. Mortality is burned off. That ego, that one life, that all the things that a single person is attached to is burned off in a fire so that the god can keep on going as that god. For us, we get attached to who we are, our name, where we come from, our personality, the way we think about things. We can't remember our former births, the vast majority of us. And gods and goddesses can, but they are not limited to a single day's attachment, just like we should not be limited to a single day's attachment that is our entire life as mortal beings. And there's another story from the the Greeks. Achilles, after the Battle of Troy. At some point, Odysseus goes to a certain area. He offers up some blood. I think it was his own blood. It could have been the blood of other sacrificial animals as well, into this kind of like creek bed type thing. And he's on the edge of Hades, and all the spirits are attracted to the blood, the life force. Because life force is connected to Gaia, to Mother Earth. And we're only borrowing the life force. That's not us. We covet it greedily, like we want to live longer. This is what it is to be alive. This is what it is to make love. This is what it is to eat. But that's all connected to Mother Earth. That's something that we leave behind when we die. So that's why they're, as these, you could say, egos, ghosts and egos are the same thing in my mind, in my understanding. I'm not a god, so, take it with a grain of salt or perhaps a barrel of salt. But all these ghosts are attracted to this blood, and they come to answer his questions. All these ghosts are kind of in a recycling phase. Even for the Greeks, this purgatory that is Hades, it was almost like a recycling phase. Just like the Aztecs believe that when we die, we go to rest in a mother goddess womb until we're reborn again. And, just how Hindus talk about, the land of the dead. And it's very similar to how egos are naturally, body identification, character identification is naturally just emerges back into the grander subconscious. And this is kind of how these ghosts are described. I'm doing this very loosely. I'm not saying these are equivalents, but this is how, all the ghosts that are kind of being in a recycling stage come to that creek of blood and to answer Odysseus' questions, because he called them with blood. The life force of the earth, which they no longer have. So he did talk to Achilles, and Achilles was dead at that point because Odysseus was talking to him after he was killed in the Battle of Troy at some point. And Odysseus talks to him, and he talks to Hercules and Achilles. Hercules, he sees as a ghost who has like a bow, and there's all these other spirits running around him, kind of afraid, and he would just pick up an arrow and shoot and shoot and shoot, and since Hercules, he kind of went back to Zeus, right, after he died, because he was demigod. But there's a shade of Hercules. You can call it a shade, you can call it a ghost. I usually call it a ghost, but that was separate from the soul. That was also more attached to that life's identity, because Hercules in the realm of the gods, he wasn't grieving for his wife still. That was a part of himself that was left with the shade, that was left with the identity, the ghost, the ego. And Hercules, while he was very strong and he's shooting any kind of spirits that he wants around him while they're like running around, that part of himself wasn't happy. That mortal part of himself was not happy. It was in the process of recycling. But he talks to Achilles, and Achilles says, I would happily be a slave. I think it was either beggar or slave, but I think he says he'd rather be a slave in someone's household than to be a dead man. And he would gladly go back to the realm of the living if he could just be alive again. Talking about how much it is to be alive rather than to be dead. Now, this can be attributed to the Greeks' kind of affinity for the morbidity of death, and how death is not something that most people in Greece, ancient Greece, thought, Hades was a place, it's not a punishment and pain. Tartarus was a place of really bad punishment. And the Elysian Fields were the place where great warriors went to. But most people went to this place called Hades that's kind of in between, where it's not good, it's not bad, it's like right in between. And you just kind of walk around it in a confused state where you can't really remember yourself. You don't really remember why you're here or what happened. But you're just kind of wandering around like these misty forests and these misty lands where it's all kind of forgetfulness. And my theory is that, they were describing the point where, the ghost, the ego, the shade is recycling back into the grander subconscious. And that's kind of how it would be when it's kind of like a sleepy state. You're not suffering per se, but you're just being recycled, and it's just odd. But Achilles was very aware that it was so much better to be able to, be alive, to eat, to drink, and to have sex, to contemplate with a clear head. And he said, I would rather be a slave than be dead. And Achilles was a very egotistical man. So probably most of what he was and most of what he identified with was in Hades in that form. So we have to think about, what are we trying to make a god? Are we trying to make our ego a god, this person, this identity? Or are we in contact with our soul? If we're in contact with our soul, odds are we won't have that desire. We won't crave for that. Because deep within ourselves, what can't be destroyed and what can't be tied to a singular dimension forever, no matter what different monotheistic religions say, no soul can be tied to a single place forever until it's completely merged back with the source. That's the only forever. That's the only eternity. Hell, realms, pain, these are things that are limited. If they weren't limited, then they'd just be as eternal as God and just be other gods. In that way, if we were to use that level of reasoning, for sure. Because it wouldn't be... There can be only one eternity that everything goes back to in the end. And no soul can be destroyed. So we have to ask ourselves, what is being deified? What are we seeking the deification of? And if we follow that to various conclusions, we'll see that a lot of the things that we want to survive is that we're just afraid to die, or we want power over other people, or we want power to shape our reality, the world around us. If you can get so in touch with your soul that you can shape your inner reality, control your mind, meditation helps a lot. Cannot recommend that enough. Magic helps. A lot of dark magics, or when you become, if you want to become a living god, that is a very limited form of God, but it definitely can happen. But it's really hard. If you get in touch with your soul, and you're so in touch with your soul that this single identity that you are right now doesn't matter, then you won't have this desire anymore. But let's say you do want to become a god, and you're willing to do whatever it takes. Let's say you get past all the whys, and you still want to do it. It's possible, very hard. I'll put it in these terms. It is possible to run faster than 99% of other people, but it is very unlikely. And it's because it is almost like you're trying to beat everybody else. But let's say it's not even like that. It is possible to fall out of a plane and have a few pieces of cloth and survive the fall. Possible, very difficult, extremely difficult. And there are a lot of dark things that you can do, you know, completely idealizing your ego, completely worshiping that, and doing all the rituals that you need to do. Get on a certain side, because it's unlikely you'll be able to do it in one life. But let's say you glorify your ego to such an extent that it survives to where most of you goes where your soul doesn't, or you trap your soul somewhere else. Most of you that you identify with goes somewhere, dark realm, and you're completely about the path. Completely about the path of making this person that you are now a god. There are dark deities, dark realms, and dark ways to do this. It's hard even if you're willing to sacrifice everything that you are, everything else. Still extremely hard. It takes a lot of focus, one-minded focus, complete-minded focus, and you're not really taking any breaks. It's a complete and utter spiritual path. It's the same path of becoming a master yogi. It's just in a different direction. Become a bogi. You know, there's bogi, rogi, and yogi. Yogi is a spiritual path of identifying with something that's infinite, identifying with your soul beyond this life, and you're slowly melting away the person that you were, and identifying, you're getting rid of that bubble that we all are until you're identified with everything. And it's said that, you know, even for whites, land whites, for instance, it's possible for a person to become a land white, to become a hill, a mountain, a stream, a river, and then a big part of the ocean, a bay, but you start to lose your identity. And there's a reason for that, because if you're aligned with the earth and you're becoming a part of it, you will become that thing. You will become bigger, but you'll lose your bounds. You'll lose your identity, and it's by necessity. But if you want to become a dark god, you can still do that. But it requires a lot of pain, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of focus, and it's not done easily. And it's usually not done over one life. If you want to do it over one life, you got to think about nothing else and completely devote yourself to that. And you can't just go around killing people and sacrificing people for that. You got to know exactly how to do it and have one focus. That's it. And, you know, once you get on that dark council, that there's few on, but there's a dark council. It's kind of like a opposite weight to eternity. There's a dark council. The old dark ones, the dark old ones. Who are just want to be themselves, and that's it. The person that they were, and they kept on going and kept on devoting themselves, kept on looking. It's possible. It's not pleasant, and it's never something that allows you to love anything else but the ego. It's possible. Self-deification is possible, but the gods, the gods that we know, like the Greek pantheon, Hindu pantheon, Norse pantheon, they don't do it that way. Not even the Jotuns. They're more earth-related. This is a whole different dark path. Choose wisely if you're thinking about self-deification. Odds are, even if you try it for decades and decades, you'll never really get far enough in one life to reach that point. You can't give somebody enough money. You can give somebody all the money in the world, and if you don't know the right knowledge, if you're not committed enough, you still won't get it. But it's better to ally with eternity and life rather than darkness and selfishness. And I don't like using duality, but in this case, with self-deification, it is. And if you are interested in becoming a god, like Odin was immortal at one point, but he took up a station, a function in the multiverse, and cared about the rest of the multiverse so much, he was willing to do all kinds of awful things, but it wasn't for himself. It was for his station in his area of influence, caring about other things. Dark self-deification, you only care about number one. And Odin didn't get there that way. And your soul, if you're not attached to this ego, this person, your soul is eventually going to become a god anyway. It's just it won't be what you identify with or you. But every soul is meant to become a god at some point. That's something that Mormons kind of got right, though in a completely different way. But, you know, in Hinduism and And even in Buddhism, in a way, becoming a Buddha, your soul is always meant to get to that level, from the material to the astral, the good astral, and then the causal. Once you get to the causal, after how many trillions of years, however many big bangs, your soul works towards it. Everybody's meant to get to the causal and become a god at some point. You will. You just won't be the you that you're identifying with. So in regards to self-deification of the gods, think carefully. Ask yourself why you want, what you want to do, and what you really seek to worship. If you worship yourself, that's fine, because even in Satanism, this isn't necessarily the path that I'm talking about. This is something that's darker than any kind of Satanism or Luciferianism. That is more about liberation of ideas and liberation of your own spiritual life force, things like that. That's something a little bit different than the self-deification that I'm talking about, the dark self-deification. You can worship yourself and free yourself through that path, but you won't become a god like that. The satanic Luciferian paths, you'll become freer, but you won't become a god like you're thinking. And there's a whole lot of chances to really become very egotistical along those paths, and to honestly just be stuck in between. At any rate, I hope this was interesting. I hope this was useful. Like this video if you found this useful at all. Feel free to comment in the comment section below. Ask questions. I tried to address a question I've got multiple times. Once recently, but I've gotten it so many times. If you have any, if you disagree with me, if you have other ideas, put it in the comment section below on YouTube, and share this video wherever you want. I'm more than welcome to you doing that. And it's kind of hard to tell this by anybody but me. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting. I hope all of you have a wonderful day.